What up, African world, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview, and welcome back to my series, A Closer Look. And today, we're going to be taking a closer look at Afro-Argentines. And as always, if you want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some new rewards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to Afrographics.com, a website where you can find illustrative infographics and resources on African history. All links in the description box below. One of the biggest misconceptions throughout the African diaspora is that African people no longer exist in Argentina. Although small in number today, Afro-Argentines have greatly contributed to the formation of the nation. The majority of Africans arrived in Argentina enslaved, as they did in the rest of Latin America, although some have been documented to have arrived alongside Spanish conquistadors. Afro-Argentines created safe havens in which their African culture could survive in cofradías, or religious brotherhoods, and in African nation societies. Afro-Argentines mixed with European and indigenous cultures to create the tango, Piata, Carnival, and synchronized religious beliefs. As free citizens in the 19th century, their autonomy allowed them to publicly express their African heritage in black newspapers and poetry, as well as to support each other in mutual aid societies. Unfortunately, during the late 19th century, the black population declined sharply. Reasons such as the end of the slave trade, conscription into the army, disease, low birth rates, and miscegenation or interracial marriage have been advanced as a cause for their supposed disappearance by the 20th century. The call for enslaved Africans in Argentina occurred shortly after South America had been colonized in the 16th century. The constant demand for labor in Upper Peru and the need for residents in Buenos Aires for field and domestic workers contributed to the first importation of Afro-Argentines in 1558. Although enslaved Africans began arriving in Argentina as early as 1534, 2 years before the founding of Buenos Aires, Pedro Gomes Reynel, a Portuguese, received the first official asiento, or contract of public law, in which an individual or company could bring Africans into the area in 1558. That year, he brought 600 enslaved Africans to River Plate. Throughout most of the 16th and 17th centuries, residents continued to request the governors of Buenos Aires to bring in more Africans. Their main purpose for the Africans were to harvest crops, erect and repair buildings, and to serve as domestic servants. Although large numbers of enslaved people entered the Buenos Aires port legally and illegally, they did not remain there. Most went to such interior cities as Cordoba and Mendoza. The nature of slavery within Argentina continues to be of interest to many scholars. Within the city, enslaved Africans were often used to show elite status. As in other slave institutions in the Americas, masters would hire out or rent their labor to others who wanted cheap labor. On hiring out expeditions, enslaved Africans in the city were exposed to a multitude of freedoms. Many Africans, both male and female, became street vendors selling empanadas, produce, and various products for the household. Afro-Argentines who earned enough money were eventually able to buy their freedom. Free Afro-Argentines and slaves in the city dominated low-paid occupations as pest exterminators, water sellers, bakers, factory workers, and dockhands. In the city, Afro-Argentines were granted some opportunities to move around on their own. The countryside, on the other hand, allowed slaves even more freedom. The interior mainly produced two products, wheat and cattle, during the colonial period. The labor required for these jobs was less intensive than the plantation systems of the Caribbean or Brazil. Rural slaves were defined as horsemen whose mobility was limitless and unchecked by authorities. Afro-Argentines worked alongside whites and mestizos as salaried peons, often blurring racial and social distinctions. The largest slaveholders in the 17th century were the Jesuits, who ironically refused to enslave Indians. As mentioned before, the latter half of the 19th century revealed a sharp and detrimental decline in the total black population with the call for European immigration. Between the years 1880 and 1900, almost 1 million Europeans arrived in Argentina. By 1900, the country's dependence on black labor and the army had been replaced by white immigrants. Culturally, Argentina also became whitened. Public displays of African culture, such as the Carnival, religious celebrations, and brotherhoods, were attacked by the government. Surprisingly, the black middle class also promoted whitening. They wished to separate themselves from the poor working class, who still acknowledged their African heritage. To be admitted into the white middle class, therefore, required the complete rejection of African culture and the wholehearted embrace of European models of progress. Added to these social and political changes, the wars throughout the colonial and early national periods decreased the black male population. The decline of the slave trade, low birth rates, and miscegenation contributed to the decline of the black community. So much so that by 1900, many people believed that blacks no longer existed in Argentina. Afro-Argentine literature and press also served as media in the black community during the latter half of the 19th century and the early 20th centuries. Black poets wrote about social injustice, black pride, and the tragedy of the slave trade. Others acknowledged the Afro-Argentine military heroes. Black soldiers had served in Argentine armies since the founding of the country, and black artists wanted to keep their memory alive. Given the pre-existent scarcity of black males, prospective black brides often married European immigrants. Interracial marriages in Argentina became very common. Regardless of the population size, the cultural contributions of Afro-Argentines defined Argentina's national culture. Afro-Argentines have creatively fused their African past with indigenous and European cultures. Since their arrival in Argentina, they created the tango, the Piata, and Carnival, as well as synchronized religious beliefs, which are still celebrated today. The tango has been referenced in documents since the early 19th century. It evolved from the traditional dance known as candombe. Tango originated in poorer districts of Buenos Aires and Montevideo. The words tango and tambo around the River Plate basin were initially used to refer to musical gatherings of enslaved Africans. Written records of colonial authorities attest to their attempts of banning these gatherings of Africans as early as 1789. Initially, tango was just one of the many dances performed by Africans, but it soon became popular throughout Argentinian society as theaters and street barrel organs spread it from the suburbs to the working class slums, which were packed with hundreds upon thousands of European immigrants. Interestingly enough, the word tango itself is proposed by some scholars to be a sort of corrupted result of the Yoruba word Shango. Shango is a Yoruba god of thunder, among many other things. The theory is that the word Shango was morphed through the dilution of the Yoruba language once it reached South America via the Atlantic slave trade. Now, this may not be the exact origin of the word tango, but it serves as a reference to its African influence. Another art form popularized by the black population was the Piata. Known as payadors, these singers improvised their lyrics while playing a guitar. It originated in the interior of the country and quickly spread to the cities. The nature of payador is improv, and it can be compared to freestyle competitions within hip-hop. The one with the best spontaneous responses wins the competition. The Carnival, which implemented Afro-Argentine dances in 1771, was a constant reminder of African origins. During the celebration, Afro-Argentines united to dance in the streets. In Argentina today, there has been somewhat of a resurgence in African pride, and various communities are beginning to mobilize. Afro-Argentinian organizations such as Grupo Cultural Afro, SOS Racismo, and perhaps the most important, Africa Vive, all help to spark renewed interest in African heritage. Other Afro-Latinos have partnered with the Afro-Argentinian populace to promote African culture as well. Afro-Brazilian migrants have brought capoeira and Yoruba religion into Argentina. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help out in its continued production, please consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.